So here we are again. Hey, Louise.
Hi. Oh, wait, hold on. Stop. Sorry.
Here we are again. Hi, Louise.
Hi, Sarah. Good to see you.
Good to see you, as always. So here we are. We are heading into the second half of the book, which is actually, she's calling it part three, the healing. But we've been through 8 chapters and we're starting on number 9. And as you all know, last week we had Nancy Verrier on, which was very exciting. And we touched on like what maybe some solutions for adoption would be, which is so interesting that now we're on that chapter about what solutions could be. So the chapter 9 is called In the Best Interest of the Child. So what jumped out at you right away, Louise?
Well, I thought a couple things were interesting. Something you and I and Rebecca Autumn talked about was just that the open adoption thing, that this kind of got into the new things that people are doing, like open adoption. And is that
Or
really the
new-ish, because this was like
new-ish?
30 years
Right.
ago, but yeah.
Right. And it's still kind of new, right? It's still sort of,
Or it's still the way people seem to be handling
there
it.
seemed to
Yeah.
be handling it. And it got into the whole, is it best for the baby still to have that whole scenario? Like we're not really looking at what's best interest for the child in any of these adoption scenarios. It's kind of like what
Mm-hmm.
makes the birth mother feel better, what makes the adopted parents feel better. None of it probably makes the birth mother feel that much better. And some of the children, when they look back on this, they're kind of turned off by how this has been handled. So it's like she's proposing ways that could be done better. And how can we, adoption's here to stay. You said that on our last podcast.
Yeah.
And it is here to stay for very good reasons. It's here to stay. But how we handle this with children needs to keep going forward with better conversations and people handling it better for the children. Maybe it's the
Well, and I
court.
think it's,
Yeah.
it circles back to what we've been talking about since we started this, is that nobody thought that babies were aware of what was happening.
Yes.
Right. So even when
Yes.
the birth mother doing the ritual with the adoptive parents to hand over the baby, obviously
Yeah.
wasn't for the baby. It was for their own need to feel better about what they were doing. Because I'm wondering if really deep down, the adoptive parents maybe know it's like a weird thing to be taking a baby, especially if they're witnessing the birth, right? It used to
Yes.
be when we were babies,
Yeah.
they didn't have to face that. It was just we were handed off. But in this scenario where they're involved with the birth mother for the months of her pregnancy, they're in the delivery room with her.
Yes.
Like maybe they must know and feel weird on some level
That
about
part,
taking that baby away.
I agree. That part sort of, I didn't really know there was these rituals actually.
I have
So,
two friends who were in the delivery room with a baby they were going to adopt, and the birth mother changed her mind.
well, that, and I was thinking that must happen a lot because all of a sudden you're seeing two parents who really want your baby. And something she touched on here is if the birth mother changes her mind, we have to allow that to happen because that
Mm-hmm.
is the mother of this baby. So she gets into this whole part about the birth mother. There needs to be pre-counseling, post-counseling, which of
Yes,
course did
yes.
not happen with our mothers.
Or I
Within,
don't even think it's happening now, or
no,
it wasn't, at least at the writing of this book.
it
And
wasn't. And we don't know that many people it has happened for. So I think she talked about there has to be
if there are any
counseling.
listeners out there that have tried something different, we'd love
Tell
to hear
us.
your stories.
We would
So
love it.
be in touch with us.
Please, because this is going to go on our podcast.
Yep.
So I feel like there's no counseling for the mother. So they sort of get into this thing where the birth mother may not know why she's doing what she's doing. She has to have a really conscious reason to do what she's doing. And in some cases, she does. She knows why she's doing it. They even got into the part where some birth mothers were sort of bargaining for money with,
Right. Yeah.
and that gets really kind of
Well,
weird.
because and the other thing that they got into was how it's a big business adoption. There's
It's
a
a big,
lot of money. So,
it's a baby business. There's someone we were trying to get on our show who wrote a book. I'll have to look up the name. There was a New York Times article about her where she talks about finding out she was bought and sold, and her parents bought her at a price. And how that made her go, what? You know, this wake up call. So this is the baby business is a big business, and
A
who's
form
best?
of trafficking in a weird way.
It is. And where's the best interest of the child here? So it gets into, I mean, there's real biological moms who need to give up their children. And
Of
there's
course.
real
Yeah.
wonderful adopted parents who want to bring that in. But she wants people to be aware of like, the problem is still the primal wound. Oh, there was a quote here. I loved it. She said right here, the primal wound. Here we go. If both sets of parents then want to have some kind of ceremony after they do some healing and some,
Counseling
therapy,
and
yes, that's fine. As long as everyone remembers that it's for them. It's not going to diminish the trauma of the loss the baby will suffer as a result of his separation from his biological mother. It will not prevent the primal wound.
right.
So no matter what ceremony or how great parents do it, it really needs to be addressed. Still, we're on the primal wound. We're still on the separation from the baby, from the original mother, is just as big as no matter how open and loving. So I think that she gets into, this is where the healing has to start, because we have to go forward as a society into bigger conversations. How do we help that wound heal?
Yeah.
I guess that was kind of, what did you think?
Well, I of course highlighted a lot as always.
I know. It's like every page.
Yeah, I mean, like you just touched on that about making that conscious choice. And then, I kind of highlighted it is much better to be so adopting parents, no matter how much they want a baby, must also understand the implications for the baby if he's separated from the biological mother. The instinct to parent is powerful, and there's nothing wrong with admitting that this is the reason they want to adopt. It's much better to be honest about the yearning to be a parent than to proclaim some altruistic hocus pocus about rescuing the child from some unknown terrible fate.
I like that part actually, because it's okay to say we want to be parents and we can't be parents. Whatever we're doing isn't working for us, or we want to be parents by not bringing a child into the world, but by helping the children that are brought. But we want to be parents. That's the key. Not like I'm a rescuer, that whole, because the reality is it, if you want to be a parent, and you should be a good parent to that baby and know it's about the baby and really be prepared. All parents should be prepared for a baby, right?
But she did talk about that too, about, really understanding the needs of a baby. It's important. This is coming to the end of the chapter, but it's important for parents, whether adoptive or biological, to realize that children take a great deal of time, attention, and understanding. It makes me nervous when people say that they want to have a baby. I'd feel better if they would say, I want to rear a child.
Yeah.
And then there's a next part where adopted children take even more patience and understanding than biological children for all the reasons already outlined in this book. They are especially sensitive to being left in daycare centers or with rotating nannies or babysitters, for example, because they've already experienced abandonment. All infants and children under 3, of course, suffer from this experience. They're not ready for extended time from their mother. So
I was thinking about that in our own lives. Like the first time I took Jack to preschool, he was 3, and it was just 2 days a week. I had to go into my office, and it was literally like traumatizing for me and for him. They were like, he'll be fine when you leave. And then I go to that window where you can watch them. Yeah. And he wasn't fine. He was like, Mommy, for like an hour, and I wasn't fine. And it didn't get that much better. And I was thinking, gosh, what did I go through? I remember being in preschool and crying a lot. I had a lot of separation anxiety, and now I understand why. And I became highly independent in a weird way. And I think a lot of adopted people do, my adopted friends like you, and I could name a few others and I won't out them. We're all very independent in a very like push back way. And I do think some of that is this like original trauma. And then the times you're left with a babysitter. I mean, no one thought of this.
I mean, she is right. Like other kids, because I've talked to friends, and we've talked about, I was talking to a friend the other day, I can't remember who it was, talking about how we cried in kindergarten, going to kindergarten, and she wasn't adopted. So
of course,
some people, but it is something. And I really liked this last line of the chapter. Yeah. Children come into the world as tiny, helpless, totally dependent beings. We owe it to them to do what is in their best interest.
Oh, I underlined it too. I love that. I actually was like, that's the reality. The whole adoption world needs to focus still on the baby or the child. It could be in a child. And this is actually kind of what we get into with our next guest is adopting a child who's gone through trauma and stuff. So it's the same wound. I mean, just having the counseling thing is, she actually said this may need to be litigated in the courts, like outlined. When you adopt a child and you give up a baby, you have to go through this.
Yes.
And this, because I know my birth mother didn't have that. And I think it changed her life dramatically. She did some neat stuff after I was born, but it was all very reckless. And I'm sure
my birth mother, it wasn't even her decision. As soon as I was born, when she landed from the plane and I got to the hospital, and the nurse was like, "You're having a baby," and her mom, who was also her adopted mother, said, "You're not keeping that baby. We are not keeping that baby." And then she didn't even make that decision. It was made for her.
Imagine that being made for you. I can't fathom what she went through, honestly. Because no matter how old you are, when you have your baby, it's your baby. I can't even imagine that feeling.
I mean, what was she, 19, 18? Legally, it was her decision, but yeah, I guess it wasn't, it was a different time. But
I think, as we talked about with our last two guests, it's a lot of those moms, it was their decision, but kind of, we put that in quotes, right? Like I with my biological mom, it really was her decision. I have letters about her decision, but I think it was a very hard decision. And I think from knowing a few things about her after she's passed away, and with my aunts, that decision was much harder than she thought it was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, in the months and years to follow, it was something that haunted her. And
I can
changed her.
I can imagine. I mean,
and there isn't counseling for that. I mean, now we could find some counseling, I think, for that. There's so many great accessible counselors. Like back then, it was weird. How expensive was it to even go to a therapist? It was a big deal. I mean, you didn't just lightly get therapy. It was
yeah. I mean, we're Betty Draper and Mad Men. It was like such a scandal.
It was a scandal. Oh yeah. If someone was in therapy, it was like, that's a sick ticket,
They're
right?
Crazy. Yeah.
We all needed it.
She's having that. What was that word that you'd call, like they used to say women had the vapors? She has the vapors.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. But anyway, I think this chapter, I'm excited to read the rest about the healing, because we've talked so much about the beginning stuff.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about the trauma. Now it's nice to talk about the healing.
The healing and what's to come, and with the adults. And this is great. I mean, and just, this has been, we're on to the next part of this book, and our podcast will continue on. So we've loved the letters, and people have been sending us
so many great messages and emails and comments. And it's really, really, keep reaching out, everybody. We love it.
Yeah, please reach out and send us notes, and put it on our Facebook page, put some discussions on there, and whatever, because we love to we want this to continue on past the primal wound.
Yeah. We're going to find another book.
Yeah. So we have lots of room for lots of guests.
Yes.
All right.
Okay. Well, on to our guest.